My name is David. I'm 35, and I'm the kind of guy who trusts numbers and a steady paycheck. For the past 10 years, I've been the sales supervisor at a small agricultural supply company situated just on the wrong side of civilization outside Midland, Texas. Our territory is mostly dust, old oil derricks, and vast stretches of ranch land that whisper about droughts and forgotten things. Our office is an old, isolated brick building. It's functional, but it feels heavy, pressed down by the silence and the endless Texas sky. My boss, Mr. Peterson, runs the company with a rigid, almost puritanical discipline, but his structure collapsed last spring when Martha, his secretary of 30 years, finally retired. Martha was more than an employee. She was the company's nervous system. When she left, the filing system became chaos, and Mr. Peterson, without his organizational anchor, started looking brittle. We went through 3 temporary replacements in as many months, all young women who lasted less than 2 weeks, citing the creepy vibe or the dead zone of the building. Then, Alana arrived in early September. She came recommended by an unnamed acquaintance of Mr. Peterson. The moment she walked into the office, the usual dusty silence seemed to deepen. Alana was tall, almost statuesque, and moved with a grace that felt out of place in our drab environment. Her appearance was memorable. Long, thick, dark hair, and clothes that were always clean but simple, almost austere, like a Sunday dress from a bygone era. But it was her eyes. Those eyes were a shock of color against the beige and brown of the office, a peculiar, vibrant shade of luminous green. They held no warmth, no flicker of typical human anxiety or friendliness. They were simply present, observing everything with an unsettling intensity, like polished glass reflecting a distant fire. Mr. Peterson introduced her tersely. "This is Alana. She's from out past the county line." That description, "out past the county line," carried a lot of weight here. It meant she was from the truly isolated ranches, places where neighbors are miles apart, and the old ways of the land still hold power. Alana immediately took over Martha's old desk. It wasn't just working, it was an act of possession. No questions about the database, no idle chatter about traffic. She simply settled in and began. The first incident of the truly strange variety happened on Thursday of that first week. Mr. Peterson had gone home, and I was wrapping up late, running the end-of-day sales reports. The silence was thick, broken only by the whirring of the aging server. Then I heard a new sound coming from Alana's desk, a low, rhythmic, abrasive rasping. I walked quietly to her doorway. Alana was not on the computer. She was leaning over the desk, using a piece of dark, oily cloth to slowly, patiently, rub a small, perfectly smooth river stone. It was dark gray, the kind you only find after decades of being tumbled in a creek bed. Her focus was absolute, her luminous green eyes fixed on the stone as if she were polishing a diamond, or perhaps extracting a hidden energy. The rasping sound was the stone against the rough mahogany of Martha's old desk. When I cleared my throat, she didn't jump. She didn't even quickly hide what she was doing. She just slowly closed her hand around the stone, making it disappear. "Everything all right, Alana?" I asked, my voice sounding strained in the silence. "Yes, David," she replied, her voice soft and utterly devoid of Texas accent. It was a flattened, neutral sound. She offered that unnerving slight tilt of the lips that passed for a smile. "Just taking care of my things. You have to keep them fed, you know." or they forget their purpose. I backed away slowly, dismissing it as some strange rural superstition, but the image of that smooth stone and the intensity of her focus chilled me to the bone. That was the first crack in my structured reality. The rituals started manifesting openly in the office. They were small, easy to overlook, but constant. Alana never used the break room. She never microwaved leftovers. Her lunch consisted only of small sips from a clay mug filled with a dark liquid. The mug itself looked ancient, unglazed, and seemed to retain a perpetual dampness. When she drank, the office would fill with a peculiar aroma that was unsettlingly organic. Not coffee, not tea, but something akin to dried moss, damp earth, and burnt herbs. I was certain she brewed it herself. Beyond the mug, there were the offerings. I started finding tiny, almost microscopic crumbs of dried corn or cracked wheat placed strategically. They were never in the center of the room. They were always at the periphery, tucked beneath the edge of the carpet, placed on the windowsills, or scattered near the electrical outlets and the old pipes leading into the walls. When I finally asked her why she was leaving food on the floor, a clear breach of office etiquette, she looked at me with genuine pity. The little ones, David, they are the true guards of the foundation. They keep the walls breathing. If you don't feed them, they feed themselves on what's closest. It was a casual statement, delivered with the certainty of a proven fact, not a superstition. And then there was Mr. Peterson. The change in him was the most terrifying evidence of Alana's creeping influence. He used to be a pillar of shouting, stress, and demands. Now he was muted. He spent hours locked in his office with Alana, and the atmosphere surrounding his door felt thick and strangely static. I could hear their voices, but they were always low, conspiratorial murmurs. I no longer heard the sharp directives. I heard patient, almost therapeutic whispers from Alana, always answered by a weary sigh from Mr. Peterson. His appearance deteriorated rapidly. His suits, once immaculate, looked slack on his frame. His skin took on an unhealthy yellowish pallor. He was losing weight at an alarming, visible rate. His eyes, once fiery with the obsession of business, became dull and constantly fatigued, staring blankly past me when we spoke. One day I found him staring out the window at the oil field across the street. He wasn't seeing oil or pumps. He was seeing something else. I asked him if he was feeling all right. "I'm tired, David," he said, his voice a dry whisper. "But Alana is taking the burden. She has a way of working with the numbers, of appeasing the requirements." I watched Alana that afternoon. During her routine water break, she used a small dark cup, never the dispenser. She walked to the main window overlooking the desolate ranch land. A sudden short blast of wind kicked up a vortex of fine red Texas dust. Most of us flinched, but Alana simply stood there, letting the dust settle on her face. She raised her hand, rubbed the grit off her cheek, and with a focused motion, placed the dust into a small, tightly sealed vial she kept hidden in her skirt pocket. She was collecting the land itself. I realized the office wasn't just a workspace. For her, it was a place of collection and ritual. The energy of the place, the energy of us, was becoming her currency. The subtle shifts quickly morphed into overt macabre practices, veiled beneath the guise of office necessities. The office plants, Martha's pride and joy, died completely within a month of Alana's arrival. They didn't simply wilt. They seemed to have been desiccated, sucked dry of every drop of moisture. Alana had simply removed the dead pots and replaced them with small, shallow trays of dry, black soil. In this soil, she would place objects, sometimes a single, dried bone fragment, sometimes a handful of old rusted nails. These were not decorations, they were altars. My own personal life was now intertwined with the office's suffocating atmosphere. The constant low-level anxiety I felt at work followed me home. I was sleeping poorly, haunted by repetitive, stressful dreams that always featured the scent of damp earth and the rhythmic, low humming sound I sometimes heard faintly from Mr. Peterson's office when Alana was alone. It was a tune that had no melody, only vibration, and it was getting louder in my head. The isolation was nearly complete. Mr. Peterson, once a micromanager, now signed whatever Alana placed in front of him. I caught Alana one day reorganizing his desk. She moved his important financial documents, the tax forms, the payroll, and placed a small, crudely carved wooden figure on top of them. A figure that looked like a hunched, elderly man with exaggerated joints. Beside it, she placed a small pouch made of old leather, containing what I later suspected were dried organs or animal parts. When I finally asked Mr. Peterson about the bizarre display, he simply tapped the wooden figure with a long, thin finger. "Alana says, it's a tether," he rasped, his eyes barely focusing. "It keeps the losses here, keeps them contained so they don't spread to the business." His words made sense in a terrifying, primal way. Alana wasn't handling his finances. She was ritually containing his bad luck, his failing health, perhaps even his sanity. The most disturbing routine was with the mail. Alana meticulously sorted through all correspondence, even personal letters addressed to Mr. Peterson. But with certain items, particularly envelopes from banks, investment firms, or insurance agencies, she performed a chilling action. I saw her use a tiny sharp needle to prick the tip of her index finger. She would then carefully apply a single, crimson drop of her own blood onto the back flap of the envelope, sealing it with a private, organic stamp. She wasn't just sealing the letter. She was, in her mind, marking it, consecrating it with a biological tie. This was an agreement signed not with ink, but with life. I knew I was witnessing something profoundly wrong, something that went beyond simple superstition and plunged into the territory of genuine folk magic or a slow-motion psychological parasitism. But fear kept me silent. My steady paycheck, my perceived safety, was tied directly to this strange woman's presence. I convinced myself that as long as I didn't interfere, the price wouldn't be exacted from me. The office became a strange nexus for the surrounding rural community. The peculiar visitors started arriving with an almost religious regularity, mostly older men and women, tough, silent individuals who smelled of livestock and dry grass. They were not customers. They were, I realized, Alana's congregation. They would arrive in battered pickup trucks and sit on the uncomfortable chairs in the reception area, sometimes for hours, in total silence. They never asked for Mr. Peterson. They were waiting for Alana. When she finally emerged from the inner office, the transactions were brief and conducted in a low, rapid dialect, full of clipped consonants and guttural sounds that seemed to belong to a language older than English or Spanish. These visitors never left empty-handed, and they never came empty-handed. They would deliver small dark bundles to Alana, handfuls of polished obsidian, bunches of withered roots, or occasionally small woven bags of fine, unidentifiable dust. Alana would accept these offerings with a slight nod, as a gesture of deep, reciprocal understanding. She was the one who managed the exchange between the business world and the elemental demands of the land. The atmosphere in the building grew so heavy, so dense, that it was hard to breathe normally. My colleagues who occasionally visited from the city branches would recoil almost physically upon entering. "Your office smells like a grave," one told me bluntly. "What is that dark air?" "It feels like the air itself is pressing down." I knew what it was. The accumulated weight of fear, ritual, and the slow decay of Mr. Peterson's well-being. My isolation deepened. My wife started complaining that I talked in my sleep, always whispering the same thing. The price has to be right. My dreams were now a repetitive cycle of me walking on cracked earth, trying to find a source of water, only to be met by a silent woman with glowing green eyes, holding a small, shriveled object in her hand. One afternoon, Mr. Peterson was particularly bad. He looked like a refugee from a famine. He was trying to sign a simple invoice and his hand was shaking violently. He stopped, looked at me, and his eyes briefly cleared, showing a flicker of his old self, a flicker of pure, devastating terror. "David," he whispered, his voice catching. "She feeds on the fear. She keeps the things away, but she has to eat, you understand. She has to eat." He immediately collapsed into a fit of dry, racking coughs that seemed to hollow out his chest. I rushed to help him, but Alana was there instantly, moving with unnatural speed. She simply placed a cold, damp hand on his forehead and murmured a sentence in that dialect. The fit subsided immediately. Mr. Peterson, exhausted, simply leaned back, his eyes glazed over again. That evening, I couldn't leave. I had to know the full price. After Alana and Mr. Peterson were gone, I snuck back into the main office. I went straight to Alana's desk. Hidden in the bottom drawer, locked with a tiny silver skeleton key, was a small wooden box carved from dark, unknown wood. The energy radiating from it was cold, almost metallic. I didn't dare use force. I simply waited, certain that Mr. Peterson had a key somewhere. I found it taped under his file cabinet, a tiny brass key, cold and unnervingly light. I unlocked the box. Inside, nestled on a bed of dried roots and soil, were the true contents of the office's bargain. A small, incredibly shriveled bird's heart, a collection of sharp, jagged, human-like teeth that looked too small for an adult, but too large for a child, and dozens of tightly rolled-up pieces of paper, tied with strands of black hair. These papers were the original unfiled copies of Mr. Peterson's most sensitive business contracts, the ones that dealt with the largest profits and the highest risks. They were not just contracts, they were offerings. As I held the box, feeling the macabre weight of its contents, I noticed that each rolled paper was stained with a tiny, nearly invisible pinprick of dried blood. The blood wasn't Alana's. The location of the pinprick was always over the signature line. Suddenly, the air pressure in the room dropped completely. The silence became deafening. The sound of a single, slow, measured step echoed from the hallway. I froze, the box of macabre relics heavy in my hands. I spun around, ready to run. Alana was standing in the doorway of Mr. Peterson's office. She wore the same expressionless mask, but her eyes, those horrifyingly luminous green eyes, were now shining with full, unfiltered power, like twin lights in the deepest part of the desert night. Her silhouette was tall and perfectly still. "The agreements are simple, David," she stated, her voice resonating not just from her throat, but seemingly from the walls themselves. It was the sound of the dry wind moving through old structures. The old agreements hold the land. You give life, and the land gives profit. You open that box, you accept the responsibility. You pay the due. She didn't move towards me. She didn't need to. The sheer force of her presence and the horrifying truth exposed in the box pinned me to the floor. She pointed a long finger, not at me, but at the contents resting on the dried roots. Mr. Peterson understood the price of fear. He was generous with his worry and his decay. She continued, the word decay sounding like a caress. But he never truly understood the commitment. The heart must be strong to carry the weight of the land. I finally found my voice, a weak, pathetic croak. What are you doing to him? What is this? Alana tilted her head, a gesture of patient pity. I am keeping the business alive, David. And now, you know what it takes. She walked over to her own desk, opened a drawer, and pulled out a small dried violet flower, one of the rare blooms that sometimes sprang up near the old building. She placed it next to the box's contents, a final, chilling punctuation mark. The flower never wilts, David. It remembers the water that wasn't there. I left that night, not running but walking with a sickening heavy clarity. I didn't return the next day. I couldn't. Mr. Peterson died 3 days later. The official cause was heart failure due to severe malnourishment and stress. His body was frail, but the company's books had never looked healthier. Alana took over the entire operation, almost seamlessly. She was the one who knew the contracts, the suppliers, and the requirements. She is the new boss. I tried to leave Midland, but I couldn't. I moved into a smaller, cheaper apartment, but the humming and the scratching followed me. I was haunted by the image of her green eyes and the awful knowledge of the price. Now I work as a freelance consultant, but I never stray far from the county line. Sometimes I find a tiny, dry, violet flower tucked into my coat pocket, and every morning before I start my work, I carefully place a few crumbs of bread and a small smooth river stone on my windowsill, just like Alana did. It's a small dew. It keeps the scratching away. I know I'm not free. I didn't get the business, but I got the agreement. I am now part of the structure, tethered by guilt, fear, and the haunting, luminous presence of a woman who understood that in the dry lands, you don't just pay taxes, you pay the land itself. And I, David, will be paying my dues for a very, very long time.